So for those who are new here, we're actually in a series called Self-Talk, where we're going through Dr. Aaron Beck's theory of cognitive behavior therapy, where we're going through certain negative thoughts and patterns in our lives that affect the way we feel about ourselves, about others, and the world. And the premise of CBT, or cognitive behavior therapy, is the idea that our thoughts affect our feelings, not the other way around. Meaning that there are certain automatic thoughts in our subconscious that we say to ourselves, that we think to ourselves, that actually distort our reality and the way we affect and behave towards others, and maybe even the way we hurt others, and with ourselves. So what we're trying to do here is bring awareness to these things, trying to capture it so that we can actually live healthier lives, so that we can become the people that God created us to be and have and create the relationships that we always wanted and desired. And so as a church, we've been going through this, and we believe that it's important to raise up the issues of mental wellness and mental health, because studies have shown more and more that people are becoming more anxious and depressed every day. And it's not getting any better. People are feeling worse, and people are struggling and not getting the help they need. So for us as a church, what we want to do is break those stigmas, break those stereotypes. For one, for a lot of us here that are struggling to get the help that we desperately need. But two, more importantly, as a church, believing that Christ is a light and a hope, and the hope, that we could actually discover that for ourselves and understand that and anchor that in the places where we feel utterly dark. And so the reason why we're going through these distortions, and particularly this one that I'm going to talk about soon, is because especially in this season when Thanksgiving is approaching and the holidays are approaching, psychologists say that this is where our anxiety and depression actually compounds the most. In fact, NAMI, which is National Alliance of Mental Illness, if you could put that up, one of the largest mental health organizations did a survey, and they talked about the holiday blues. And they say 64% of people during this season are affected by a lot of anxiety and depression. They feel it more than the other times throughout the year. And they also say that 24% during the holidays actually affect them a lot, very intensely. In fact, there's another survey that they didn't show over here, where they say that with adolescents and with children, the winter season is actually the peak of where they get psychiatric help and they get hospitalized. And that's in this season where the holiday season is approaching, that's where they come and seek mental professional help. And you ask why? Why this season? Why particularly throughout the winter months? And it makes sense if you really think about the fact that throughout this time, this is when our external environment is even more volatile, and we have these social obligations and interactions that we don't want to deal with. For example, for an external environment, in the holiday season, some of us have to travel, right? And in their travel, there are certain things that you can't control. Like, for example, what happened on Thursday, like out of nowhere, there was this crazy snowstorm that happened. And even Dr. Sammy and Pilet and their family, they were supposed to go to on a trip, and they were stuck in the airport for 14 hours, right? Like, travel, especially throughout the holidays, is hectic. If you old school people here seen Home Alone, that's what the whole story is all about, right? It's about the hecticness of the holidays and the stress of it, right? And then there's some of us here that host, right? And when you're hosting and when you're cooking, anything could go wrong. The oven can go wrong, and something gets burnt, and it might ruin the whole meal. And if you're one of those people that care about that stuff so deeply, you know that cooking the turkey is the most important thing. It's the thing that people don't really like but want, right? No one goes, oh, I really want the turkey. They just want to see the turkey, right? But if you don't have the turkey, it doesn't feel like Thanksgiving, so there's so much pressure that's going into it. And so even as you're hosting, you feel this anxiety and this pressure to get it right because you want everyone to be happy. And for those who are married, you have to make that decision. Whose family do we celebrate Thanksgiving with? My family or her family? And you got to disappoint someone, right? You're always disappointing someone. And it does, and it bleeds to our family obligations and expectations, right? And it hurts because the culture perpetuates this beautiful picture about this amazing family gathering where everyone is so happy, and that turkey is actually beautiful in the middle and is perfectly roasted and is steaming, and everyone's drinking wine, and everyone's having a good time, and the kids love each other, and when it's really not the case at all. In fact, for many of us, family is not so pleasing and happy and joyful. It's actually a source of stress. It's a source of conflict. It's complicated. And that's why for some of you, there's a reason why you only meet your family once or twice a year, right? You don't want to deal with them. And it's true. For a lot of us, family gatherings is not the greatest part. It's full of conflict. And we don't want to go back to our family that will tell us how much you gained so much weight in college. Why'd you get bigger? We don't want to hear, or in the more serious thing, why do you still not have a job yet? Are you still single? Why are you still single? We don't want to hear about those things. Those overwhelming expectations and opinions that we have within ourselves is being compounded even more with 3, 4, and if you have a big family, 8 voices in your life. And that's why in this season, if you really think about it, with our external environment and with the expectation of others, why our anxiety and stress is so compounded. And because of that, that's why we're going through this series, and particularly today, I want to talk about the distortion of the control fallacy, because I think that would really help us. How many people here are control freaks? Raise your hands. You guys like control. Come on, all of you do. If you didn't, you wouldn't have an iPhone or a smartphone. You guys like control. You prefer your apps, what you want to go, where you want to go, how you want to go. We all want control, and what we want control of is 2 things, our environment and people. And when we can't control one or the other, we freak out. We get upset. When we can't control our circumstances, it makes us very unhappy. Like at restaurants that I go to, I get very unhappy when I can't control the food, right? That happens. And especially in this time of year, when our external environment and the people that go into our lives is less controllable, right? I think this distortion can actually be very strong within the season. And what I want to do is help us unwrap it, identify it, and if you're new to our church, what we do is identify it, reframe it into the reality, and see how the good news of the gospel actually frees us and brings us to a greater reality in how we live our lives. And so that's what we're going to do today. You guys ready? All right, come on, I got to hear you. You guys ready? All right, awesome. Thank you. Some of you guys are probably still have that itis from eating a lot yesterday. But let's go through this. So we're going to go into Mark 4, and we're going to talk about control fallacies. And so verse 35, it says, that day when Jesus came, he said to his disciples, let us go to the other side. Leaving the crowd behind, they took him along just as he was in the boat. There were other boats with him. So just putting in context right now, Jesus and the disciples, they just finished preaching and teaching, right? And at this moment, Jesus wants to move to another territory where he wants to spread the gospel. So what he decides to do is get his disciples to go on a boat and cross over what we call this body of water, which is called the Sea of Galilee. Now, if you don't know what the Sea of Galilee is, it's actually mentioned a lot in the New Testament. It's actually a body of water that they often travel back and forth on. Like, for example, when Jesus called James, John, Andrew, and Peter, when they were fishermen, they were fishing on the Sea of Galilee. Actually, when Peter actually walked on water, it was actually the sea. And so this is very important to understand because this is a sea that they were very familiar with. It's a sea that they know. It's a sea that kind of like that was in their backyard. But what happens is that in this particular moment, it says in verse 37, a furious squall came up. Now, if you don't know what a squall is, it means a violent storm. Literally, the definition that it entails snow, sleet, and rain. And you know what that kind of storm was? Is what happened on Thursday. Snow, sleet, and rain. It was that kind of storm. And it was an unexpected one, like what happened, right? Meteorologists were like, okay, it's only going to be like 1 or 2 inches. There's going to be no problem. It was far worse than that. It was insane. It was crazy. And that's what happened with these disciples. They were going along a boat that they were familiar with until it became unfamiliar and unexpected. And it was to a point where the waves broke over the ocean so that it was nearly swamped, meaning that they were slowly losing control. They didn't know, they knew what was going on, and all of a sudden, it didn't. They felt like they were losing grip. They felt like they were being capsized. And all of a sudden, they felt like they had nothing, they couldn't do anything anymore, right? And because of that, and because of their loss of control, they started to freak out. And when they started to freak out and they actually saw Jesus sleeping, which is pretty interesting, he was sleeping while the storm was happening. I know some people that actually sleep through storms or fires, right? Thankfully, he woke up, right? And through fires, they were upset. It was to a point where they were blaming Jesus for just sleeping when there was a storm going on, right? And you see that right here where it says the disciples woke him up and said, "Teacher, don't you care if we drown?" Like it was his fault, right? But for a lot of us, how many of us react like that, right? When things don't go our way, when circumstances happening, how often do we blame the circumstances or blame someone else? For someone, when someone gets lost, it was your fault. No, it was your fault. You're the one that didn't give me the directions. You're the one that gave it to me late, right? When things don't go our way and things don't go according to plan, the first reaction is to just blame other things and other people, right? I saw this so clearly on Thursday when that snowstorm happened with my small group, the young adult small group. So college students, you get a pass today. Young adult, not so much, not this one particular person. And just to give you some context, we have small groups on Thursdays for the young adults. So once again, if you don't know, if you think you're a young adult, we'll tell you based on your age, okay? So anyway, so we're in young adults, and the snowstorm started happening in the afternoon, and all of a sudden, the Kakao chat or the group chat started to blow up. Someone that I won't name, but it's actually up there, so too late. Sean was the first person to say, "Are we still having small group despite the wintry bliss brewing in the air?" And you see his icon, like that thumbs up sign. I think he changed it to, make it like, are we gonna cancel small group, right? And you would think that just reading through this message, like this guy is very far away. Right? Like, he's in Jersey now. He has to travel through the train. And then it was crazy at Grand Central also, where there was they couldn't even move. They had to cancel everything for like a couple of hours. So, you would think that this is the reason why Sean was saying those things. But in reality, Sean was at work. And you know where his workplace was? It was literally 10 minutes away from the Mulberry apartment, walking. And so Jenny, who lives in Brooklyn, lives and works in Brooklyn, by the way, was like, "I'm taking the R train here, and the R train is terrible, and I'm coming to the small group." So she called him out on it, and he goes, "Bro, you cold, Sean?" Right? And I bring this up because it's such a clear picture of how circumstances, just a little bit of change changes our mood so quickly. And it also challenges our values, right? And that's the problem with this distortion and the danger of this distortion. When we are so consumed by our external environment, we forget the values of what we have. We forget why we're doing this and where we're going. And as a result, we actually become victims of our environment. We are shaped by our environment, and we are dictated by it, right? So what is the distortion? This is the point. This is the definition of the distortion. I feel out of control, and there's nothing I can do about it. Hashtag victim mentality, hashtag reactive. And the reason why I say reactive is because that's what we do, we react. We react and complain or vent to things of what we cannot control, and we vent to people and everything else and waste our energy on those things rather than focusing on the energy on things that we can. And that's the next part. So what is the reality? Let's go to verse 37. Ooh. Verse 37 says, a fierce squall came up and the waves broke over the boat so that it was nearly swamped. Jesus was at the stern, sleeping on the cushion. The disciples woke him and said to him, Teacher, don't you care if we drowned? Now, like I said before, some of these disciples, they were expert fishermen. That means they knew the sea like the back of their hand. They fished there. They lived there. They worked on it almost every day of their life. Yet, when this storm came, they had no control. And this is the other part of this distortion. There are some that feel victims of our distortion, of our circumstance, but there are others that feel like we can control everything, right? Some of us think if I work hard enough, if I plan long enough, if I outsmart everything and I outsmart the system and I know everything, I can control my environment, right? How many of us think like that sometimes? Like, right? Yeah, there are some of you. Me too. I feel like that. I'm like, I think I'm smart enough to actually control everything around me. No, that's what we call delusional. We're delusional to think like that. But for some of us, we might fall into the victim mentality, but for some of us, we think we're too smart. And the truth is, even though we can plan everything, and we can plan our lives. I tried to plan my life. I thought I was going to get married at 25 and start a church and be amazing. None of that happened. I just went to Bible school. That's where it was, you know? Right? We can plan our whole lives, and we could have people plan for us, but there's always going to be something that will get in our way. And you see that within here. These fishermen were experts in their craft, but even with them, their circumstances was much bigger than their capabilities and their abilities. And what this shows is that there are times where we could do everything in our power, but we are not victims, but circumstances sometimes overtakes us. It just is. That's the reality. Now, I know some of you guys are saying, okay, Peebs, are you saying, Peebs, that's my nickname, Peebs, or Pastor Billy. If you're saying, like, Pastor Billy, are you saying that, we're just victims of faith? That we have no control, so there's no point and not to do anything. No, I'm not saying that. I'm there because even in spite of circumstances that are out of our control, we still have things where we could actually respond to. And that's the reality. And this is the point. The reality is this. You can't always control your circumstance, but you can always control your response. You look at Jesus, the difference between Jesus and the disciples, and you see that here. The disciples were freaking out. They were freaking out because they felt afraid and anxious of the storm. And you look at Jesus, he's sleeping. He's relaxing. And even when the disciples woke him up, in their anxiety, because sometimes when people are anxious, you can feel their anxiety, right? Even in their disciples' anxiety and in the external circumstances, you see Jesus not conform to what was going on, but he stood, rebuked the wind, and said, "Quiet, be still." There was a man named Viktor Frankel that said something very similar. And can you put this quote up? And he said this. He said, "Everything can be taken from a man, but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way." Now, if you don't know who Viktor Frankl is, he's a psychiatrist, but he's also a Holocaust survivor. And in his observation and also in the process of being in the concentration camps, he experienced a lot of pain. He lost his family, and he had to endure a lot of suffering. And looking back, as he was discovering how he overcame the almost impossible odds within himself. And looking into the survivors that actually was able to overcome the situation, he said that the one common denominator that actually helped us go not fall into despair was holding on to meaning and purpose. Meaning, he was saying that those who lost hope in the process of it died quicker and fell into despair and into their own hopelessness. But those that held on to a promise and a hope or something that's further was able to sustain and strengthen. And it's in that observation, in that study, he wrote, "Everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way." And later he would say, when we're unable to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. Now the reason, I don't know where you guys might be, but the reality is that there are things that we cannot control. There are circumstances that are in our lives that are beyond our capabilities, but there is one thing that we can do. We could respond to it. We can choose how we could look at it. We can choose to either let it dictate our joy, our happiness, our posture, or we could respond to it and not let it conform and shape us, but to rise above it. And that's the question I have for you guys. What do we do when stress overwhelms us? When things get out of our control, do we fall into a victim mentality? Or do we respond to it, look into it, and see the things that we can control rather than things that we can't? That's the question I have for you guys. And I know some of you guys that are more skeptical are saying, well, Pastor Billy, when you're looking into this passage, of course Jesus is relaxed. He has the power to stop the wind and the weather. We can't do that. But, when you look at Jesus' life and you look at toward the end of his life, there was a storm in his life that he didn't stop. And it was the storm of his crucifixion. And even though he had every power to quiet it, and he had every opportunity to actually quit, what we see in the life of Jesus is that he actually chose to endure it. And you ask why. Why would he endure so much pain, suffering, and external circumstances that he chose to be out of control, actually? And that's because he chose to love us. Like, his love and his care for us is so deep that the storm of sin that separates humanity and God, that's so far away, he chose to walk into the cross, into the pain and suffering, and even to death, so that we could be reconciled to him. And this is good news. Why? Because, one, it shows us that we have a God that understands our pain, that understands our circumstances. And he's a God that will walk through us and with us in those places. And he's not a God that just pretends like everything was okay, but he's there with us. Because the truth is, in this life, even Jesus said this, that we will have troubles in this world. Meaning that even if you're a Christian, that doesn't mean, and you surrender your life to Jesus, that doesn't mean that you would have no more problems. But actually, the truth of the gospel is, and the good news of the gospel is that he will give us the strength and the power to endure it because he's done it himself. And so for some of us here that might be struggling and having a hard time, and you're wondering, where is God in all this? I want to encourage you in saying that God is there with you. And if he didn't abandon us on the cross in the storm of sin, he will not abandon us in the struggles and the storms in our lives that are here right now. And you see that. You see that in this passage. You look at verse 35. Can we turn to it? And it says, that day when evening came, he said to his disciples, let us go over to the other side. When you look at this, it was actually Jesus' idea to move into the sea. Meaning, in a way, it was almost Jesus' fault, I you could say, that we're entering into the storm. And you ask why? Why would he do that? Why would he bring his disciples into the storm? And it's actually very clear. It's the fact that he wanted to show his disciples that he's greater than all our circumstances. Like, for example, this happened to me just recently last week when we were doing the spot care packages. For those who don't know, we gave out 250 care packages to NYU students to raise mental health awareness, because we know in this season a lot of people feel that sense of anxiety and loneliness. And so our goal was to give 250 students that message of love. And so we created these not only these sweaters that were very, very expensive, and hopefully they would wear these sweaters and hoodies to share that love with other people in the campus to know that they are loved and they matter. But the problem was that these hoodies were very expensive. They cost like $25 to $30. That's a lot of money. I mean, Mark, he wants high quality hoodies, champion hoodies. I was going for the cheaper version, like, can I get $10 for hoodies? But no, he wanted that $25, $30 hoodie. So because of that, we were limited in how much we could give because of our budget. And I was stuck in the dilemma, and I was asking the college students too, because I wasn't sure. Because within our budget, I knew that we could actually afford, or I could actually raise 200 hoodies for these college students. But I knew that 200 wasn't really enough. It doesn't ring. 250 would be like the right amount, and everyone agreed. But the problem was 50 units of hoodies, you multiply that $25 to $30 per, that's over $1,250. That's a lot of money. Right? And I was stuck logically, you would go for the things that you could afford, not the things that you can't afford, right? That makes sense, because if you don't, you're going to be in a deficit, right? And I was stuck. But I remember when I was praying through this and I was thinking through this, I remember a professor telling me, when you do ministry and you live out life, if you do things that are under your own capabilities and strengths, you're just trusting in yourself. You want to be in a place where you're put in a position where God can move. And when that thought came into my mind, that was scary. And so we decided to do 250. And that was the worst and best decision for that care package. Why? It was the best and worst decision. It was the worst decision because not only when we were trying to raise money, we weren't even just down 1,000 at that point. We were down actually 2,000. The donations and the fundraising, maybe I thought I was better in my capabilities of raising money. I guess I wasn't. It was lower than the expected amount. And we would all have all these sponsors that we would reach out to, and they were like Chick-fil-A, and they're like, yeah, we like your idea. We want to sponsor you. And then afterwards, we heard nothing from them. And as the day approached, we were still stuck in 2,000. We tried to reach out to the student board because they have all the money. And we sent them an email, and we got nothing back. We also had problems with them last year. And they're like, you can't ask for extra money again because this is the last time. And so we're like, oh, maybe this is the situation that we're in. And the most craziest thing happened. And it's weird because it happened in the last night. The night before the event, we get an email from the student advisory board because we thought they hated us. And they just said, just a simple email that says, we granted you your contingency, here's $2,000. I was talking with Sally and Jonathan, I was shocked. Because these were the people that we fought last year. These were the people that didn't like us last year. But out of nowhere, at the last moment, in the last minute, they said, okay. And so that covered exactly our cost. We got actually to be fair, we got $200 over. But that $200 actually ended up, we had to pay for the Thanksgiving potluck, so we broke even. But it's crazy. And the reason why I say that is because I think for a lot of times we don't want to be in control. We're afraid to be in control. And sometimes we're afraid to trust God because we don't know what's going on. But it's usually in those moments where we recognize that God is much bigger than we realize. And that's the whole point of this passage. And that's why this is good news. It's greater news than the reality. Because in the places that we can't control, in the places that are beyond our circumstances, We can choose to trust in one that actually can. And that's why it's good news. And so my encouragement to you today, if you guys are struggling right now because the dots aren't connected, and you're in a situation where you feel like you're helpless, you can choose God. And for some of us that are feeling anxious toward the Thanksgiving season of seeing family or whatever that you're doing, I pray that this will be a reminder to you that you can actually look to God and that He is with you in your storms, He is with you in your process, and there is a reason for everything that's going throughout your life. So what is the good news? What is the good news in this distortion? This is it. God is the one who's in control over all circumstances and helps us courageously walk through it. I pray that you may know that today and walk in that throughout the season. Will you please stand with me?
Will you lift your hands with me to the Lord? Let's make this our song, our prayer. The Bible says that it's in our weakness that Christ's power is made perfect. See, Christ's power was made perfect in the eye of the storm in this narrative.
You are my strength.
You are my strength.
You are my strength when I am weak. You're the treasure that I see.
You are the treasure that I see.
You are my all in all.
You are my all in all. Seeking you as a precious jewel, Lord, to give up I'd be a fool. You are my all in all. Jesus, Lamb of God, worthy is your name. Jesus, Lamb of God, worthy is your name. Taking my sin, my cross, my shame.
Taking my sin, my cross, my shame, rising again, I bless your name. You are my all in all. When I fall down, you pick me up. When I am dry, you fill my cup. You are my all in all. Jesus, Lamb of God, worthy is your name. Jesus, Lamb of God, worthy is your name.
The control fallacy posits very clearly that I could only be happy if my environment and the people around me changes for me. Well, then you're never going to be happy. Never going to be content. The truth is, in most relationships, if it's going to work, you're the one that has to change. You're the one that has to apologize first. And you go, well, why do I have to apologize? They don't want to apologize. Well, you can't control that. And here's the major epicenter of this fallacy. It's that you cannot control control. Can't control control. That's a fallacy. That's the distortion. No matter how much you feel like you can, it's not possible. The reality is, what people think of you, you cannot control. So today, even if you're not a Christian, you're a seeker, you're not committed to Christ, well, that's the dilemma, the moral dilemma we live in our lives. You're not sure. One of the reasons why we have anxiety is because you're not sure what the job markets will be like. Automation can replace you. A robot can literally replace you. Right? We went from computers that were human to the IBM that made everyone that could calculate advanced math obsolete, unless you knew how to program it. It's going to be the same in the future. So my question then, as we close today, is what gives you the security and confidence to know, to have hope that your future is secure? Based on reality, you have none. But the Bible says, in such a precarious times, in a precarious world, that Jesus is the same what? The same what? Yesterday, today, and what? Forever. Amen? Amen. The logic behind why Jesus went into the eye of the storm is because we might be freaking out, and we always will. Jesus says, "Why did you wake me up?" Aren't you afraid you're going to drown? And Jesus like, "I don't drown. I walk on water." So, in the end, you can either be a water walker or drowner. Those are the two options, because you can't control the storm. But you can control your response and say, "God, I want to rise above the storm. I want to walk with you." First of all, that's a lot more exciting than drowning. You ever went water skiing? Pretty fun. Christianity is an invitation to water ski with Jesus. And that invitation is given to you today. And so if you're a Christian today and you're like, "Well, my life is not like that, I'm always drowning," well, then you're not controlling who you're putting your faith in. You're putting your faith in physics and not the one who transcends physics. You're a Christian. You're not a Christian today. You're like, "Well, I'm not sure if I can put my hope in Jesus." Give it a try. So today, will you lift your hands as we pray? And will you tell the Lord, just like Peter and the disciples, rather than drowning because you put all your faith in the physics of this world and what your assumptions of what will happen and what has happened in the past, say, "God, I want to be a water walker. I want to partake in an adventure with you, Jesus, that my children's children could tell stories about, and legitimize the power of who Jesus is in my life." If you're a Christian today, I pray that that would be the challenge of this message. You would rise above this distortion. In the midst of storms, the peace of God would be the evidence of God's power in your life to the people around you. You are my strength when I am weak. You are the treasure that I seek. You are my all in all. Seeking you as a precious jewel, Lord, to give up I'd be a fool. You are my all in all. Jesus. Jesus. Will you bow our heads for the benediction? Be still and know I am God. Be still and know that I am. Be still and know. Be still. Be. All God's people say, amen. God bless you. Go in peace.